Good evening, everybody in YouTube land. Welcome again to another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. As before, for folks who might be new, you put your questions in the chat and I respond to them as best I can. This is all about psychic phenomena, parapsychology, the paranormal. I typically don't get into other unexplained things because I don't really have expertise in those areas. If you want to hit my other expertise, I have a lot of expertise in the mentalism world, psychic entertainment, and with respect to chocolate. That's a whole story in itself. So good to see Susanna and Sandra here. Hi, Robert. Nice, welcome. I did send you a reply to your email, but I'm going to talk about your question here in a bit as well. Tina, nice to see you there. So it looks like we got some of the regulars here for things. This is, of course, one of a couple of sessions we're doing in April. The next one will be on the 28th. I'll repeat that later. Please do feel free to ask questions. I will say this, and I may say it again. My producer is in Pennsylvania and apparently having a lot of thunderstorms. So hopefully he won't lose power and we won't lose the stream. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully we'll have a good session tonight. So welcome everybody and thank you for coming. So I did get an email prior to the show about something to talk about. So I think I'll start with that since the person who sent it, Robert Henry, who's there, has actually asked this question. I just have to find my right email for this. There we go. And really, this is just kind of collapsing this question. Has to do with, what we're talking about when we talk about ghosts and ghostly encounters, because there are, there's a lot of baggage and different definitions in pop culture, if we look at ghost stories, in folklore, if we look around the world at different ideas of what a ghost is, different belief systems from different religions, there's quite a bit of difference that we have. So we have to kind of collapse it down. And we've done that in parapsychology, psychical research since the late 1800s. In terms of the terminology we use, the labels for things, because ghostly encounters, when you use that phrase, what television calls the paranormal has a lot of potential differences in terms of the experiences themselves. There are not only differences in how an individual might experience these things, but also what might be causing them or what's behind them. And I'm not even going to address the normal explanations for some of these things, because when it comes right down to it, in any given experience that somebody has, there can be a wide range of normal explanations that causes them to either perceive things that seem to be out of the ordinary and then label them as paranormal or supernatural or something else, or things that actually affect our our actual belief systems, so that we have to, whatever the experience is, we have to fit it into that box of our belief systems as well. There are a lot of different normal explanations we go through in parapsychology, looking at these definitions of things. Robert's is putting them here. The empirical data on such experiences and phenomena is clearly different than philosophical, metaphysical definitions. That's correct. And then even anthropological definitions, traditional definitions of things. Even outside of philosophy, we get into folklore and occult beliefs and religion as well. So first thing I'll say is that when you say ghost, since most people would say a ghost is the spirit of someone who's around after death, I think that's what most people would say or believe. Well, certainly that's what we see on television. That's what we see in movies, most movies. Good example right now is the TV series Ghosts on CBS, the BBC program that just finished, which is available out there as well, that the show is based on. Going back in time, Ghost and Mrs. Muir, Topper. There have been tons of shows all over the world about ghostly people, because that's what you mostly see in these circumstances. So if we take that idea of a spirit after death, in parapsychological work in psychical research, we have taken that idea, because early on, psychical researchers called this human personality. The word consciousness hadn't come into things yet, but it's the same idea. What is the thing that makes you you? That's the human personality or consciousness. And so we look at the idea of a ghost, or the term apparition, as many of you know, that I use and most of my colleagues use, as consciousness after death existing outside the body and capable of interacting with the physical world. There are circumstances and reports that go back to the 1800s, and we even have more recent ones, of apparitions of living people, kind of projections that people have. So we are looking at consciousness itself as the apparition or ghost. Now, that's different than perhaps what a medium would call a spirit. So I think that for me, when we're looking at this, spirit refers to consciousness. It's the thing that makes you you. You know, you can use the word soul, but that has so many religious connotations to it. Makes it kind of difficult. Mediums, evidential mediums or spirit mediums, they use the term spirit to refer both in general to the spirit world, the other side, so to speak, but also to individuals who are on that, who have transitioned to whatever the next stage is and are projecting back, capable of communicating through the medium. They use the term ghost for someone who is still here in the physical world and capable of interaction. And the cases that we investigate, the experiences people report, are that second category. People who have not left or transitioned. However, the majority of apparitional experiences tend to happen close to the death of the person it represents, the apparition represents, often short at the moment of death, shortly after that, maybe for a couple of days, perceived by people, living people who are relatives, friends, loved ones of that apparition. Then they move on or disappear or whatever happens next. We only have, you know, mediums to communicate with them ostensibly from the other side that gives us any sort of evidence there. But the apparitions that are present, that seem to be present, the consciousness that sticks around, is a different story, because we can have all sorts of experiences of that individual, that entity. The personality doesn't appear to change at all. And we know that how we perceive that apparition can be different from person to person. So it's up to us as the witness, the experiencer of that apparitional encounter, whatever our process is, psychically and perceptually, we may have different interpretations, visual, auditory, olfactory, kinesthetic. We might feel certain things of that apparition, different aspects of that apparition as well. So you know, in philosophy, I know it's different, but here we're talking about consciousness capable of interacting in some way, shape, or form. And it depends on the psychic ability, which is inherent in all of us. You know, ESP is non-sensory perception. So it's a perceptual process, not a sensory one, which we call ESP, with us connecting with that apparition. Susanna says consciousness can be affected by influences such as drugs and so on outside the body after death. I wonder if consciousness is affected by any type of influence. That's a really good question. We have no way of knowing at this point, unless the apparition sits down for an interview and discusses how they feel or their perceptions of the world, of course. And separating that from hauntings, or what people on TV call residual hauntings, the idea that a place or even an object holds information that we as living beings with ESP pick up perceptions of events and people that were in that place or around that object. We're picking up the information and playing it back in our perceptions for us. So not conscious in that way. Big difference. In some respects, you could say that hauntings could be conceivably, because I'm seeing Robert's next comment, that hauntings could be just related to the brain connecting with the environment, something physical in the environment, which would make it a very materialist phenomenon, not a, you know, dualist or other kinds of philosophical approach phenomena about consciousness. Do you think that some scientists hold to a reductionist positivist presupposition of reality, struggle with identifying agency with phenomena measured without a physical body? Absolutely. Even people in the field of parapsychology, we have materialists in the field of parapsychology. Look at all of our, across the board, all of our evidence for survival of bodily death as actually being evidence for a different form of ESP, a much more extensive form of ESP that can be shared between people as well, between witnesses. So it varies. You know, there's a philosophical approach. I am not a materialist. I don't approach things this way. Partly because of the evidence for survival that I've seen, and partly because of some experiences I've had. But it's mainly the evidence is what got me there first. Susanna, the body is, as Bernardo Castro refers to it, as an associative boundary from one person to another. since that interactive is different with either a different body or none. Yeah, I mean, when we look at altered states of consciousness, what we're doing really for altered states is we're affecting the body, therefore the brain most of the time. If consciousness is more than brain, it just really depends on how you define consciousness. And that definition is different within fields of science and certainly across the various disciplines of science. There's not really an agreed upon definition or understanding of consciousness at this point. One of the things that I've covered in my classes, I'm certainly going to cover it more extensively in the class coming up that I'm teaching starting in the first full week of May on human consciousness and survival, is really the question of what is consciousness, and it's a question we don't have an answer for. I mean, there are a lot of people that have answers, but not an agreed upon answer. We don't know where it comes from. It depends on your perspective, whether it's materialist or something else. And even if you're a materialist, there might be some possibility for survival, depending on what consciousness actually is for that. Could a person be unknowingly practicing mentalism instead of being psychic? So that's a complete, let's take a left turn here for this. Mentalism is a branch, well, it's sort of a branch of magic, the world of stage magic and conjuring. It actually grew up alongside of mentalism, of magic, of stage magic in the 1800s. And in some respects, what we call certain aspects or practices within mentalism or psychic entertainment go much further back than conjuring, other than a few tricks and things. You know, that the idea of stage magic, or has been called conjuring, sleight of hand, things like that, that goes back to shamanic practices tens of thousands of years ago. And we do know, for example, some tricks like the cups and balls. The ancient Egyptians, there were people performing the cups and balls back there. We know that from hieroglyphics, for example. Mentalism is alternatively simulating psychic events or magical or occult events and things like that. If it's a certain branch of mentalism called bizarre magic, it is also simulating unusual psychological performance. There's a lot of different fake explanations or backstories to the things that we do in mentalism. But one of the things that's most commonly known is something called cold reading. And cold reading, unlike what you hear from the skeptics, is much, much more than just giving stock readings that apply to everybody or generalizations. It has to do with reading someone cold. And this is something that actually good salespeople do. In fact, good communicators do that. It's not just subject to performers. It is noticing nonverbal and actually verbal cues that come from the people you're speaking with. And yes, even real psychics do a bit of cold reading. You know, I've had discussions with mediums and psychics. You can't eliminate cold reading unless you eliminate all visual and auditory and other cues, even smell cues. That's why the experiments with mediums that Julie Beischel does through the Windbridge Institute has removed any possibility of any cues at all that go to the medium, because we have nonverbal communication that we consciously or unconsciously pick up. So that can actually happen even in the best experiences. And one medium put it to me this way. It was my friend Annette Martin. She said, in talking to a skeptic who said, everything you're doing is cold reading, we got to eliminate cold reading from what you're doing to prove that you're real. She said, okay, that's fine. I can do that. But, you know, it's impossible in a normal reading, which is one-on-one with someone, with clients. If somebody is nodding their head in response to something, what am I going to do? Ignore that? I mean, that's a real bit of communication that's not necessarily psychic at all. So let me, it's really hard to eliminate the nonverbals and even the verbals that people say. No matter how much you tell people, don't say anything but yes or no, or tell me when something's not right, they still do. So we'd have to really, I don't know, train our clients, which doesn't really happen. Okay, let's see here. Robert, again, are you familiar with the work of Rupert Sheldrake? Yes, I am. If so, what do you think of his work with dogs and other psychic phenomena, humans as well? I think he's done some really good work. There's been some replications of some of his work as well. You know, the idea of dogs knowing when the owner was going to be home. You know, there are some, just in general, when you have a pet, it is possible that the pet responds on a regular basis once they understand that you regularly come home at 5:20 p.m. They're ready, there and waiting for you. But the studies were done remote, you know, with a lot of randomization there, and that was important. And it wasn't like the dog heard a specific frequency of your car motor from down the street, because in some of the observations, the dogs were actually reacting well before the person got home, before that car was anywhere in the vicinity at all. And with humans, you know, people do react. The studies that have been, not just with sheldrake, but studies that have been done with something called um, present, you know, instead of it's a form of precognition, um, which is presentient, whether you're presentient or prescient in that way, that our bodies react actually anywhere from 3 to 15 seconds, often before we're shown a stimulus. This is work that Daryl Bem has done. Dean Radin has done this. A number of others have replicated it as well. So there is something to be said about that. Now, Sheldrake's idea of the morphic or morphogenetic field, you know, to me, that kind of is reminiscent of the Force in Star Wars. But there may be something to that, you know, that we may sense something that is in the environment, and that may give us the cues to know when something is about to happen. Or, you know, I don't see those dogs reacting before the person got home as necessarily being precognitive. They may have been reacting to being aware that the person was on their way home, for example, kind of like remote viewing in that sense. But there's you know, we have a lot of research with the Gonsfeld technique, which is a mild sensory deprivation technique that's been repeated, replicable. We have remote viewing work that has been done under really great conditions that is both you can have precognitive remote viewing, you can have just general remote viewing. The whole government program, the Stargate program, had a lot of really good data. It is not 100% or even close to that. And that seems to be because of human performance in general. You know, we're dealing with human beings that a lot of factors are involved there. So there's quite a bit there. Yeah, morphic resonance, the morphogenetic field or morphogenic field. I've heard it phrased a whole bunch of different ways. But I do think Sheldrake is onto something that sort of connects to also things that research that Michael Persinger and others have done, looking at the geomagnetic field shifts and their influence on animal migration patterns and on human beings in general as well. Yeah, Ghoster is saying it's the same as when some animals like snakes and goats sense earthquakes are about to happen. You know, the whole idea of pressure waves, P wave, that even some people might be sensitive to. You know, there could be serious changes in physical environment that we are unconsciously aware of as animals are, that give us a cue that something's about to happen. So all that is stuff that we have to consider when we're looking at psychic phenomena in general. Susanna has a dog that sleeps in a crate. You know, she's going to be awake at 8:30, give or take, but I have to assume that she's receiving light cues and so on. Yeah, and I have one of my cats just most often will wake me up if I am not out of bed by 7:30 in the morning on a weekday or even on a weekend. I get up before that during the week. I don't get up before that. I sleep late on the weekends, but he'll still wake me up because he knows it's time to be fed, that first feeding. So animals get used to a pattern and they get used to a routine, and that routine can be very right on point time for that as well. So that doesn't count as psychic necessarily. I would certainly not consider that psychic in that way. And that's not how the experiments were actually done. So, you know, we have to look at a range of different pieces here when putting all this together. But, you know, one of the things that's important to know, and I try to get it across as much as possible, to the way we look at apparitions and hauntings, especially. Poltergeist phenomena is a different thing, different animal altogether. But ESP is involved. We talk about perception. We're talking about the senses and how we process things. And in many respects, we create our own reality because our perceptions may be different. And the way we all each see reality, react to it, can be conceivably different as well. Are there any attempts on establishing conversations with traditional scientific institutions? Yeah, there have been many attempts, some successful, by parapsychologists to reach out. We have interaction with different scientists in different fields. In fact, parapsychology in many respects is an interdisciplinary field anyway, because people come to the field from different disciplines. There is very little opportunity to study just parapsychology out there. So we see people kind of bringing in ideas from other fields as well. And the way we look at experiments and look at the situation, we're pulling from psychology, we're pulling from physics. We have to look at the research that's going on in other fields, in sociology and anthropology. All of that's really important. And we have people coming to the field, probably a few more now than we did in the past, because of consciousness research in general, and the fact that we've been sort of doing that for a long time in our field. The idea of psychic experiences, psychic phenomena, has serious implications and connects directly to consciousness research on the question of what is consciousness. I'm not just talking about survival. I'm not just talking about apparitions, just in general. So we have a little bit more of an interaction. And then folks like Ed May, who ran the Stargate program for the government, whose background is in physics. He edited and published a 2-volume set called Extrasensory Perception, Science, Skepticism, and I'm trying to remember what it was actually, I'm just looking at his research, Skepticism and Science. And he purposely took and cajoled researchers in all sorts of fields to take a look at research in parapsychology, specific experiments, and just looking across the board. And he had to push a lot of them to even do that, because what we see from people in these skeptical institutions or scientific institutions, they refuse to even look at the research if they have that bias. But he got them to do that. And there's a lot of work in those 2 volumes that are surprising statements from these skeptical scientists who said, oh, this is good research, may not agree with the interpretations, but we're getting a lot more kind of crosstalk now happening in certain areas as well. We'd like to see more. Absolutely like to see more people coming into the field, as much as just looking at our research, let alone acknowledging we even exist as a science. What do you think of the astral projection, out-of-body experience phenomena? And do you think we can learn from primitive models of the soul and so on? Well, first of all, there's a whole segment of us in parapsychology that are very interested in cross-cultural models and experiences. In fact, I am teaching the other full class that I'm teaching starting in May is called Paranthropology. My undergraduate work was in cultural anthropology, looking at supernatural and magical belief systems around the world in different cultures, and then trying to figure out if they related to parapsychology at all, to psi. And so paranthropology is that subset of parapsychology that looks cross-culturally at people's belief systems and also reported experiences in other cultures, including, yes, primitive models of belief systems and experiences reported in the literature or hieroglyphics going back as far as the Sumerians. We can only go in that sense from written records. But then the traditions of other peoples, of other indigenous peoples, such as the Australian Aborigines, a culture that may actually have an oral tradition back at least 40,000 and it's likely even much, much older than that, based on the dating of some of the rock paintings that exist in Australia, and other indigenous peoples around the world as well. There are a lot of oral traditions, not just written stuff, that we look at. So yeah, we're learning from that. As far as out-of-body experience, well, there's been research in that area. Charles Tart started with that in the 60s. There were even people doing it before that. I worked for a short time at the American Society for Psychical Research, and the main research program was looking at out-of-body experience. The Monroe Institute has done work in OBE research for decades. I've had my own OBE experiences, and I know a lot of other people who have. So yeah, I mean, that is one kind of experience that suggests that consciousness can at least extend well beyond the body in a very experiential way, as opposed to just an informational way, remote viewing being informational. All of that's there. And there's quite a bit in the literature going back quite a ways, to the very beginning of our field in the 1880s. And people who've been able to do some really interesting things with out-of-body experience. And the experience of it for them is different than remote viewing. Interestingly enough, people like Ingo Swann, who taught remote viewing to the original viewers, also Keith Harari, who not only did out-of-body experience research, but then did remote viewing research. For them, the two were very different experientially, personally, at how this worked. So we see all that happening quite a bit. Hi, Danya, and welcome, Ben. Consciousness equals what it's like to be a bat. Yeah, what is it like to be a bat? That's a good question. Maybe we should ask Batman, or actually really Man-Bat for those into the comic books. All right, any studies on young children who have imaginary friends? There were studies done. Certainly, we've had a lot of studies done over the years with children in psi. Sally Drucker was one of the researchers. She's still connected to the Rhine Research Center. She is one. There have been a number of folks that have been doing research on children, and part of that has been the imaginary friends thing. That's more, however, in the realm of spontaneous psychic experiences and looking at those experiences that people have reported. Because the imaginary friends and whether or not they are actually apparitional is a secondary question, what you're asking. I think there have been psychological studies on certainly there have to have been psychological studies on children having imaginary friends and what age they stop talking to them. I think what age they stop talking to them, obviously, as children get much older, they have other interests. That's part of it, but part of it also might actually be what their parents tell them, and whether or not that's a no-no for kids to even talk about. Certainly, they don't talk about them in school because that would be a bad peer pressure thing. It's the same suppression we actually see with psychic experiences too, with kids. As you grow up as a child, either your parents, your religion, someone's telling you that this is not real. Someone is telling you can't really do this. Education system tells you that that's not real. The culture says you're weird if you say any of these things, talk about these things. So it's always a problem with that. I know there's a new Ryan Reynolds movie coming out called If, all about imaginary friends being real. So that'll be kind of a fun thing to see. Robert Hen, you wrote an article on the intersection between Christianity, Egyptian mythology, and Tibetan Buddhism, but it was rejected by a conservative theological. Yeah, I would definitely be interested in it if you want to send that to me. You might look into the work of Robert Breyer, B-R-I-E-R. Bob Breyer was someone in our field who wrote quite a bit about the anthropological perspective, but he did actually he did write on Egyptian magic as well. So he would be a good person in that realm. You have performed out-of-body experiences, Robert Monroe's method. It works, but really hard to achieve. Yeah, there are different ways that people get into the OBE state, and not everybody does it. I personally look at that as, outside of the spontaneous experiences that people have, as potentially an issue of where our abilities and belief systems lie, because not everybody has the same psi experiences. Not everybody has the same aptitude for an application of psychic abilities the same way. So we see psychics, for example, with a range of different applications of ESP or psychokinesis for that matter. There are people who can do psychic healing who may not be able to cause any sort of effect on technology, and people who can create an effect on technology who can't do healing or move an object. So there's a range there for PK. For ESP, some people are good at precognition, but only if they in precognitive dreams. They can program themselves for that. Some people are really good at reading people. Some people are really good at seeing ghosts. Some people are really good at doing psychometry. There's any number of applications of psychic ability of ESP, and not everybody seems to have the aptitude. And talking to some of the remote viewers who are really good at it, including Joe McMonigal, there, and as well as psychics and mediums I've worked with over the years, you kind of have to figure out what you're good at. Kind of like, am I good at playing stringed instrument, learning to play a guitar versus a violin versus a piano versus percussion instruments? I may have an aptitude for certain musical talent. I might have an aptitude for painting in certain ways, certain traditions, versus sculpting. So it's similar creativity in that way as well. These are all really great questions. So, definitely keep them coming here. So we've got a little break here for that. But yeah, Robert, definitely send me that paper. I'd be very interested in reading it. Not surprised that it's been rejected. Science publishing itself is, because I've actually worked for a company that has some element of science publishing. It's an economic model, and sometimes, the fact is there's not necessarily room for everything, and editorial policy or editors themselves kind of turn things away because they personally don't have a belief in something. We see that even in parapsychology journals. Are there any dangers to OBEing? I'd say probably spending most of your time trying to do it. We have not heard of any real dangers here. We haven't, there's the idea that if you leave your body, somebody else can jump in. There's really no evidence for that. And in fact, even the occult idea of a silver cord, in surveys that have been done of people who have out-of-body experiences, more than a couple, even the one that they might report, the idea of the silver cord, which is an occult tradition for astral projection, in one of the surveys conducted by my late colleague Carlos Alvarado many years ago, 5%. That was it. Nobody else saw him. And the people like Alex Tanis, Keith Harari, Ingo Swann didn't need a silver cord. In fact, talking to Alex years ago, who was the research subject at the American Society for Psychical Research, he felt that the visual of a silver cord was a security blanket for the people having the experience, because they needed to feel connected. Whereas he felt, and actually others felt this as well, he felt that his spirit wasn't leaving his body. Part of his consciousness, he would say, would split off. And as we talked about it, like a space probe sent out by a starship. And he actually called his out-of-body presence Alex 2. Same with Keith Harari, that this was part of their consciousness splitting off, not the spirit leaving the body. And in fact, Alex would say, if my spirit left my body, I'd be dead. So that was never much of that going on. John, so Alex trained you. That's very cool. That is very, very cool. The silver cord shows up in a lot of occult literature. So do a lot of misinterpretations of psychic experiences as well, for that matter. Of course. So excuse me, I'm going to pop a little sugar here because I'm starting to feel low blood sugar. I missed lunch today. All right, other questions? All right, well, let me switch gears a little bit. I'll talk about the classes coming up, and we can come back to this, of course. So with the classes coming up for the Ryan Education Center, as I mentioned, I'm teaching an 8-week Paranthropology class. So that's a parapsychology and anthropology class. That's one of them. I'll also be teaching a course on human consciousness and survival studies. So looking at the idea of evidence for life after death, for survival of consciousness beyond, outside the body and beyond the death of the body. And then I'll be teaching a 4-week class starting in mid-May, which is on developing your ESP. It's called Developing Intuition. So kind of based on the practices and findings of parapsychology research, as well as my having worked with a lot of psychics over the years as well. Robert, do you ever work with any ghost hunting groups? Well, besides training ghost hunters, we just finished a field investigations class. I have my own people I work with. I've been doing this for a very, very long time, doing investigations. We have the Office of Paranormal Investigations, and we're going to be launching an OPI network website very soon, something that's been a long time coming, which will at least kind of give some spotlight on people who actually seem to know what they're doing, who have kind of passed courses, who are kind of vetted in a lot of other ways with that. I have advised ghost hunting groups, but I've been very critical of ghost hunting groups as well. If they're following the methodologies they see on TV, because those methods are, even if they might have started out that differently, but TV producers have heavily influenced what's on television and what they're seeing. The biggest problem with ghost hunting groups in general is if they accept that certain methods they see on TV. First of all, in parapsychology, we would never investigate in full darkness unless that is the only condition under which people are seeing the ghosts or experiencing things. And even then, we have to consider that in darkness, we are terrible observers of anything as human beings. And there's all sorts of possibilities that are not paranormal. We don't focus on technology. We use environmental sensors to support the experiences of people who think they're experiencing something paranormal. We also use them to find non-paranormal explanations. There are no devices that can detect consciousness. There are no devices that can detect ghosts or anything psychic for that matter, other than human beings. So I will work with ghost hunting groups to kind of educate them. I have mentored people over the years, and I certainly have advised ghost hunting groups in the past for things. Ghoster, speaking of sugar, what wine is good with dark chocolate? Okay, now you're getting into my real expertise here. Just kidding. A really jammy Zinfandel, it's red wine. Sweet wines, of course, are really good. So ports and sherries and dessert wines in general are good with dark chocolate, but a really jammy Zin, a really good jammy. So when I say jammy, it should have a lot of fruit forward kind of thing, flavor. Really dry red wines don't work well with dark chocolate. And then if you're looking at other kinds of wines, again, dessert wines in the white wine arena might be okay, like a late harvest something. Prosecco is really good generally with dark chocolate as well. But a jammy Zin, a jammy Petit Syrah or maybe Cabernet Sauvignon, something like that, work really well. Okay, John, you've seen both Alex and Alex 2 at the same time. Cool. I certainly work with them and had some really interesting experiences. Danya read an article that said Nostradamus predicted Prince Harry, not elder brother William. Oh no, that's not possible. I would love to see what quatrain that article referred to, and then go back in the previous editions of the books about Nostradamus, because you can go back decades in those and see how they interpreted the same quatrain. Because Nostradamus did not predict pretty much anything that is accurate, but it gave a lot of generalizations that can be applied to a lot of different things. There are only a couple of dates that were even given. And I've even seen the 1999 date, which was supposed to be World War III with missiles, that what he was really predicting was the fireworks all over the world when 99 turned to 2000. So it can be interpreted so many different ways. Robert, you work with a group in Cincinnati area, and they're pretty reputable. But are you familiar with? Oh, I'm somewhat familiar with the Bobby Mackey Club. I don't give any credit or support to the idea of demons. They are a religious interpretation or mythological interpretation of phenomena. And the idea of a demon, it really depends on how you define demon. So I kind of leave it at that. I grew up in Reform Judaism. We don't have demons. We didn't have Satan or the devil. That never was part of my upbringing religiously. Anthropologically, what is called a demon in Western Judeo-Christian tradition in terms of, of the devil, the basic problem we actually have, first of all, in parapsychology, there's several problems. One, we haven't seen any evidence of that. Secondly, just because something appears to be harmful does not mean it's demonic. Something demonic would mean truly bad intention, and that's a human thing. I don't think that that's a demonic thing, because humans do bad things. Ghosts are people too. They're still human in that sense. And if you really want to believe in demons and be worried about them, frankly, if you look at the Old Testament, I would be more worried about angels based on the Old Testament. The book I grew up with, more or less. So you can look around the world anthropologically, cross-culturally. There are evil beings, evil gods, evil things, but there are also harmful things, and none of it kind of fits into what we're actually seeing people experience. Interpretationally, what people have told me, they have a demonic thing going on in their house because the local ghost hunter group got an EVP of a growl. Not enough to say that that's even harmful. Depends on what's going on there. And I don't believe in a heaven or hell the way in the traditional religious context either. So that doesn't seem to fit with what we get from apparitions or from mediums and people like that. Possible, Danya's saying possible that Harry could be king and possible Nostradamus. Yeah, it's not really specific to Harry or anyone else. And if you look at the monarchs and the interplay in the monarchs in the UK and in England over the centuries, it would have been a pretty good guess that something was going to happen somewhere along the line. But did Nostradamus say that? What did Nostradamus say about Harry that could possibly be? That's back to the whole reinterpretation of things. Susanna, yes, ice wines, sweet enough, and that would, sweet wines would work with even dry red wines for that. Any information on the metal monoliths popping up? I think I know what you're talking about, but I know what you're talking about with the monoliths that have mysteriously appeared, kind of looking like the monoliths from 2001: A Space Odyssey. I think that's what you're talking about. They are probably not paranormal in any way, shape, or form. You've read some literature suggesting that demonic is referenced. Yes, yeah, that would make sense. Angry spirits, frankly, and I'm going to use this word here, assholes. People who were assholes when they were alive, or bullies when they were alive, are often, people don't seem to change their personality when they die, and they're still like that. So you want to call them a demon? Well, you should have called them a demon when they were alive. Dybbuk, not demons. Dybbuk are not demons. Dybbuk are traditionally disturbed spirits, and you communicate with them to help them. That's what a couple of rabbis have said. They're not evil spirits in that way. And there's no such thing as a Dybbuk box. That was completely created. Yeah. And yes, Robert, this whole thing there's so much theology, even in pop culture today, and boy, we're seeing it in politics too, that the idea, what we're experiencing, what people report, once you get past it, it doesn't really hold up at all. Not at all. Graveyard Grog was going to say when people have encounters and they say or claim they got hurt or deep feelings of dread, the local groups say it's evil or demonic. They automatically say that. Deep feelings of dread that can happen in a haunting because something bad happened, something tragic happened in a location, and it feels bad. That's imprinted information. And yes, that could have included a real horrifying murder. That living person who committed that murder, unless you want to call that person demonic, then, we can't use the word demon. And by that nature, I think harmful or dangerous in that sense, harmful especially, that's a word we can use. I would say that sharks are incredibly, great white sharks are potentially dangerous and harmful. So do we want to call them demons? Depends on how you want to look at it. All right. Yeah, it really doesn't help the situation at all. And what ghost hunting groups that have embraced the demonology concept, they're following, again, some of the TV shows, and it's very exciting for them. But none of them are trained in actual demonology, which would be a religious interpretation. And I've seen websites where they claim, the ghost hunting group claims to be doing something scientific, and they tout the fact that one of their people is an expert demonologist. And that's hardly scientific at all. Susanna, the little evangelical group who reside in your little town, has put the kibosh on several paranormal investigations because of their mentality. Yep. We see that quite a bit, unfortunately. That only hurts the people. I understand why they're doing it for places, but if somebody had a difficulty with something paranormal or psychic and they put the kibosh on that, that would be potentially harmful to the people who are having the experience in general. Any experience or thoughts about the folklore of vampires? Way back when, in my college days especially, I've got a really great book by Ornella Volta, is the name of the person, where she vampire folklore as created by Bram Stoker in Dracula, and how he pulled together historical stuff and folklore of Eastern Europe, but not just vampire folklore, other folklore as well, to give Dracula his backstory and powers. And that became the standard folklore in pop culture for vampires until the Twilight trilogy came out with sparkly vampires. So very, very, the folklore is different around the world about vampires. Most of it comes from pop culture or a combination of folklore as well. The spirit world can be dangerous, but needn't be evil in the strictest sense of the word. I think that is absolutely accurate. I would say that there are very few evil people in the world. There are a lot of disturbed people in the world who do evil acts, but that does not make, them Lex Luthor or, some other truly evil being, Thanos or something like that from the comic books and movies. Tina, you went to Syracuse to enjoy the eclipse and hang out. That's very cool. Bad omens for the eclipse. Yep. I actually saw a meme on Twitter. Somebody posted a picture of a small poster that had been placed on telephone poles around their town, claiming, this is before the eclipse, claiming that the rapture was going to happen on April 8th because of the eclipse. It's bizarre. It just depends on how much play it gets in pop culture, of course, in the media. And this was one where a lot of people could actually witness it. So across a wide swath of the United States. So I think that's why it got a lot more play. Robert, you remind you of the Satanic Panic, yeah, but you listen to Iron Maiden. Yeah, I listened to Iron Maiden and to Black Sabbath, actually, or early on. So, yeah, there was that whole thing was just totally overblown, of course. Let's see. I will say that some strange experiences and visiting some locations. Yeah, I think that most times people have strange feelings or odd feelings. If you then do a look into the history, you'll find that something negative or positive happened there and seem to have left an impression on the place. That falls into the haunting idea, which again might be psychic, or it might be even truly us connecting with the Earth magnetic field or some other field in the environment that holds information. It's kind of an information theory idea that's separate or different than the idea of psychic experiences or picking up information that way. So what was the name of the author again? Ornella Volta. Ornella Volta. I also recommend, and you should be able to find copies, free copies on the Internet Archive of Montague Summers' books on vampires. Those are pre-copyright. And he wrote books on witchcraft and wrote a book on werewolves from a religious perspective, but pretty cool books on vampires, I think. Let's see. Andrei Tarkovsky films. I really don't, I'm only mildly familiar with Andrei Tarkovsky's films. I have not seen the Decalogue films at all. I'll have to look those up. Graveyard Greg, I got buddies who are major into heavy metal, so this comes up quite a bit. Iron Maiden comes up a lot with one of my friends. Yeah, that's right. Information theory, hence morphic resonance. Of course, one of the things just to bring up is that in physics, there are some proponents that the smallest, you go down below the quantum level, and the substrata of the universe is just simply pure information. That's the smallest thing we can get to is information in that way. All right. So while I liked Iron Maiden and a lot of some of the other heavy metal bands, it's not my normal go-to for music. I'm more of an R&B guy. I always put Earth, Wind, and Fire up as my fave. So for a very, very long time. But I like some heavy metal. So kind of fun. I also, I am not in the Kiss army, but I'm kind of a fan of a lot of Kiss's music, and I really like the mythology they created, especially for comic books. So that's always kind of fun. Let's see. Quantum mechanics is predicated on intentionality. Yeah, actually, and on the observer effect. So, when it comes right down to it, the good news and the bad news is that we look at that quantum physicists are probably the group of scientists who are most connected and most interested in parapsychology research and consciousness research in general. Quantum physics is often misused to describe what's going on with psychic ability. It may be actually that there's quantum effects with ESP and psychokinesis, but people will often use the metaphor of quantum entanglement to explain ESP. It's a metaphor for ESP. Maybe it's involved, but it's just not there yet. And actually, I think I mentioned this last time. I heard somebody at a recent ghost hunting conference I went to up in Oregon, that Susanna was at, talking about ghosts being subatomic and that orbs are caused by flashes on our camera reflecting off of quantum particles, which is not physically possible from a physics perspective. That just doesn't happen. So, who is my favorite philosopher? I can't really say I have a favorite philosopher. I've read over the years little bits of philosophy here and there. I couldn't even conjure up anybody. I can just say that one of the books that really impressed me, although I'm not sure, just simply in discussion, was a book that Ed May gave me or referred to me, Giulio Tononi and his book Phi, defining consciousness as the ability to process information, and the more information the ability to process exists, the more conscious you are. So he gave consciousness to things like cockroaches because they can process information, not the same consciousness as we have. Kind of an interesting way of looking at things. Let's see. Philip Goff may be interested in parapsychology given his commitment to panpsychism. Yeah, and there are people in different philosophies who should look at what we're doing in parapsychology. And there have been conferences specifically looking at Parapsychology and Philosophy. In fact, the Parapsychology Foundation, the website is parapsychology.org. If you go into their library they have recently made all of their conference proceedings, which were published as books, available for free download. And there was one specifically on parapsychology and philosophy. So I highly recommend that. There are other materials, and we do see papers occasionally published in the Journal of Parapsychology and the Society for Psychical Research's journal, and also the Journal of Scientific Exploration, the truly multidisciplinary organization looking at the unexplained in a lot of different ways. That journal also has articles on philosophy that pop up from time to time. All right, we're down to the wire here. We only have a couple of minutes. So I'll mention again the classes I've got coming up with the Rhine Education Center, which is rhineedu.org. It's in the description for the channel. You'll find that link. Starting the first full week of May, I'm teaching a course called Paranthropology, which is a seminar course in parapsychology and anthropology, looking at psychic abilities and phenomena across cultures. And then I'm also teaching a course looking at the evidence for survival of bodily death. So it's called Human Consciousness and Survival Studies. That's an 8-week class, also starting that first full week of May. And then later in the month, I'm doing a 4-week class called Developing Your Intuition, which is really developing your ESP. And just kind of teaching people about that sort of thing. John Kruth, the executive director of the Rhine Research Center and the Rhine Education Center, is teaching a course on psychology and psi, and has some really cool guest lecturers coming in for that class. It's not a course on counseling. It's about how human psychology interacts with psychic abilities. And then Jimmy Aiken is teaching a course, kind of an overview course of the field called Introduction to Parapsychology. So I recommend you look at at the website and see what's coming up. And join me in 2 weeks for another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. The last question there, how many stars would you give the new Ghostbusters? If the first Ghostbusters gets 5 out of 5 stars, this one I would give 4 out of 5 stars. Because I don't think anything's going to ever have the same impact as the first Ghostbusters. But I really enjoyed this one. And I will be buying it when it comes out on Blu-ray, for sure. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We're now kind of closing down. So remember that all the previous sessions are available on the live tab here on Ask Professor Paranormal's channel. And you can always email questions to me at askprofparanormal@gmail.com or just profparanormal@gmail.com. And I hope to see you all in a couple of weeks. Thanks.